So, although Jean Ossorio wasn't actually raised by wolves, she was taken to the Missouri woods for the first time at just 6 weeks old. Her parents were nature loving and they actually met on a field trip. And during her childhood, she accompanied them on annual camping expeditions to New Mexico and southern Colorado, falling in love with the Southwest and its native habitat. Now, spending over 530 nights tent camping in the Mexican wolf recovery area since 1998, she has seen 57 Mexican wolves in the wild, which is amazing. She served on the stakeholder panel of the 2003 Mexican Wolf Recovery Team, on Governor Richardson's Catron County Wolf Task Force in 2005, and as a pre-release pen sitter for the Coronado Pack in 2003. Now, she occasionally writes features for the website Lobos of the Southwest, which is also known as MexicanWolves.org, and she gives frequent public outreach programs on the Mexican gray wolf, just like today here for our Chihuahuan Desert Fiesta. And so with that, I do want to give you a nice warm welcome, Jean. Thank you so much for presenting for us today. And whenever you're ready, we can go ahead and get started. Oh, and I think you're still on mute, Jean.
About that.
There we go.
As Sarah said, I've given a lot of presentations. I lost count at about 30 of them over a number of years, but I have to say that I've only done 2. This is the second Zoom presentation. I've been in some meetings, but it's a little daunting, and I am sort of a Luddite and not big into dealing with technology, and had a few glitches this morning, so I'm still sort of like, ooh, I'm here and didn't completely blow it. The Mexican gray wolf, which is known in scientific circles as Canis lupus bailey, you see wolf number 903. She was a longtime matriarch of a pack in the wild. You see her in this photograph. The Mexican gray wolf is the smallest, the southernmost, and the rarest subspecies of gray wolf in North America. It used to range at one time from the southwestern tier of states, probably, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and possibly parts of Southern California, down about as far south as Mexico City in Mexico. It's a small wolf. The length of the wolf from nose to tail is about 5 feet. Compare that with about 4 feet for a coyote. And it generally, a really big male might weigh 85 pounds. I think there have been 1 or 2 maybe in captivity, I'm not sure, that were 90 pounds, but it's normally somewhere around 55 to 80, 85 pounds. Its primary prey was probably the small deer that live in the border area and on down south into Mexico, a white-tailed deer, and javelina and other small mammals, rabbits and things like that, jackrabbits. It lived mostly in mid-elevation mountainous areas, and in Mexico, the 2 main mountain chains, Sierra Madre Oriental and the Sierra Madre Occidental, were probably its home. Next. Canis lupus bailey was almost driven to extinction. And the way that happened was that livestock interests were not happy with losing livestock, cattle, sheep, and so on, to wolves and other predators. And there was a major campaign by the federal government of predator shooting, trapping, poisoning between about 1915 and into the really almost up until the wolf was just about wiped out. By 1950, there were very few of them anymore in the United States. And by 1970, the last 1 or 2 were being killed or essentially shot, basically. In 1976, after the wolf was almost extinct and was basically extinct in the US, the government changed its tune a bit, and the Endangered Species Act had been signed by President Nixon in 1973. So in 1976, the Mexican gray wolf was listed as endangered. And the government sent, they did a quick about face and sent one of the wolf trappers that had been instrumental in wiping out most of the wolves in the United States to Mexico to round up the last handful that he could find. And he brought back 5 living wolves. There were also a few wolves in captivity that turned out with DNA analysis in the 1990s to be pure Mexican wolves, and they were added to a captive breeding program. Next. So captive breeding came to the rescue of this almost extinct species, subspecies. It's, as I said, a subspecies of the gray wolf. Those last 5 wolves in Mexico were caught between the years of 1977 and 1980. A captive breeding program was begun. A number of facilities signed up to breed them and have them in captivity. Some were zoos, some were specialty organizations that, you know, and facilities that specialized in wolves or other wild canids like endangered swift foxes, that kind of thing. This is one of those facilities. It happens to be in the state of Missouri, not too far from St. Louis. And this facility has the distinction of being the site of the first captive conceived litter. One of the first wolves captured, the first 5 was pregnant when she was captured. She had puppies, but unfortunately, and they were sired by a wolf that was never captured, number wild 1. But when she had her pups, any female pups that she had died. So it was looking really touch and go as to whether there would ever be a Mexican wolf captive breeding program. However, in 1981, they had the first captive conceived litter at this, what is now called the Endangered Wolf Center, used to be called the Wild Canid Survival and Research Center. And they were raised pretty carefully. These were precious little puppies. And I want to ask you, if you're looking at the screen now, how many wolves you think you see in this enclosure? I'll give you a couple minutes to peruse it, you know, look around and see what you think. And not to torture you for too long, but yeah, hold up some fingers if your screen happens to, yeah. I see 2 in the picture. There were actually, I took this picture in about 2007. There were actually more in this enclosure, a couple more. There was a little family in there. But the fact is that when they raise captive wolves, particularly those that are likely to be released, they try to keep them as wild as possible. So yeah, I see somebody has put up number 2. Yeah, that's all I've been able to find in this particular photo. I took more than 1 photo, but these are pretty obvious enough that you can find them with a little effort. Anyway, they are in an enclosure where they can hide. They're usually not just out on public display. They keep them isolated from the general public, go in rarely to the facility, into the captive breeding pens, the places, the enclosures, I should say, they're not pens really. And that way try to keep them wild as possible so they won't get into trouble by getting too close to people, you know, going up by somebody's campsite. So it makes them a little hard to see when you're in the wild. If you think it's hard in this picture, go looking for them out in the woods. Let's see, next please. They wrote a recovery plan for the wolves that came out in 1982 and continued captive breeding. And by the year 1998, there were sufficient wolves in captivity that they were able to pick some who had good behavior, that is, they were wary for the most part, and ones that had good genetics, ones that were genetically redundant. That means there were more wolves with very similar genes, their siblings perhaps, still in captivity. So if something happened to them, they could be replaced out in the wild. And on March 29th of 1998, after these wolves had spent about 2 months, I'm sorry, the month of February and the rest of March, in captive pens in the wild. There were 3 family groups in 3 different pens over on the Arizona side of the state line in the Apache National Forest. And they opened the pen gates and turned these wolves loose on March 29th, 1998. Next. When they released these wolves, they were released under what is called a 10J rule. Section 10J of the Endangered Species Act provides for the releasing of wolves into the wild that they're really highly endangered and are no longer occupying a particular area, and they want to get a population of them going there. And that's why it's called the 10J rule. And from 1998 until 2015, they were released as an experimental non-essential population in accordance with this 10J rule. And what that does is it allows more flexible management. They don't have to declare critical habitat for them. So human activities kind of go on without a whole lot of concern. But one thing that it also allows is the removal of wolves either by lethal or non-lethal control measures. They can take them back into captivity or kill them if they kill too many livestock. That's the primary reason. They can also take them in for being a nuisance sometimes. Next. The 1998 rule had a number of flaws, and I'm not going to go over all of them. It really had some problems, but one of the most critical ones is the very small size of the recovery area. And if you look at this slide, you will see that there is an area that is colored orange and an even tinier area that is colored pink. And they have a sort of fat pink line around the whole business. The entire orange portion and the little pink part over in Arizona are all within that primary recovery zone and secondary recovery zone. Where it says BRWRA boundary down in the legend on the map, that's referring to that outer boundary of the only area that was allowed to be occupied by wolves up until 2015. If they went across that line outside of that area, wolves were to be, they had 2 choices. They could bring them, translocate them, they call it, bring them back into the recovery area, inside that small area, which is basically the Gila National Forest and the Apache National Forest in Arizona, or they would take them back into captivity if they kept doing this. And the pink area is the only area where until 2015, they could initially release wolves directly from captivity. They could move them over there, over into New Mexico, from Arizona, from that pink area, if they had reasons for translocating them, for moving them, and there were various reasons why this could be done, but they had to have some wild experience in Arizona first. And so this was very restrictive and tended to put a bit of a damper on the population. By the way, the Fort Apache Indian Reservation you see in yellow, in around, I believe it was about 2002 or thereabouts or 3, they signed an agreement to allow wolves on their land, and there are several packs there now. And they reproduce and mix up with the ones that are in the National Forest. Next. Well, by 2003, when the 3-year review came out, review by some scientists of the program, it had become pretty evident that there were some issues. And one of the issues they identified that was a problem was the boundary and also the strict rules about releasing them only into that tiny area. So in 2004, a conservation organization called the Center for Biological Diversity filed a lawsuit. I'm sorry, they filed a petition. They asked nicely, you know, please, would you revise this rule, make a new rule? They petitioned for rulemaking, which is part of the whole National Environmental Policy Act, or that's called NEPA by its initials. Citizens can do this. It's like a citizen petition. And a lot of species have been put on the list, and their management outlined and planned according to rules that have been made after petitioning for rulemaking by citizens. Well, that was in 2004. I think they filed a second petition in 2006, and by 2012, they were getting a little tired of waiting around, and so they, and I think some other groups may have signed on to this one, but I didn't have time to research it. A couple, certainly the Center for Biological Diversity, and I think a couple of other groups filed a lawsuit and said, we want a new rule. You guys have been ignoring our petition, and we need to get it done. And so they went ahead and did the process. They had public meetings, you could make comments and so on. They put out a draft environmental impact statement, people commented on that. And by January 2015, they put into effect a new reintroduction rule. Well, as you'll see in a minute, that rule had some issues as well. It was better, it gave them a much bigger place to roam, the wolves, but it didn't solve all the problems. So in March 2015, a legal challenge to the new rule was mounted, this time by several organizations, and they challenged, among other things, a numerical cap that was placed on the population. There are no other endangered species I'm aware of where there's a cap to how many of them you can let happen. I mean, when you start recovering them, nobody ever says, hey, this is too big. This was done in this case. There's also a geographical boundary, and there is also increased take allowed. And take means anything that basically interferes with the wolves, such as shooting them, trapping them, and also sometimes, unduly moving them around or taking them back into captivity. So those were some of the grounds on which the suit was filed. In July of 2015, a couple of other groups, other than the ones involved in the first lawsuit, filed a legal challenge to the non-essential designation. And I'm going to talk about that in a little while, and it's kind of difficult, so I hope you can follow when I do. It's complicated. Next. The 2015 10J rule is flawed, just like the other one, only not quite as badly. If you look at this, and I'm pleased at the way this looks on my screen. I hope it's as good on the screens of the people who are watching. The Wolf Management Zone 1 is the only place under this rule where wolves can be released directly from captivity. Management Zone 2, they can wander there, but Arizona has put some additional requirements on that, as to you have to have too few wolves and you need to get the population up, and then you're allowed to let them go all the way over to Highway 93. And then Zone 3 is the one that would come closest to here and to where I live in Las Cruces and closest to El Paso. And in this area, wolves, in order to occupy it, are required to have plenty of ungulate prey to support them, and to also not get into any kind of trouble with livestock and people. Well, when you find me the wolf that never gets in any trouble, I'll be surprised, let's put it that way. Next. These are the things that are basically involved in the lawsuit. The reintroduction rule caps, it kills or removes from the US population any wolves over the number 320. 320 is it. Get any more than that, you got to take some into captivity or shoot them or something. It avoids accountability for genetic improvement. The Fish and Wildlife Service is trying to improve the genetics of the wild population, but it is not accountable in the sense that it doesn't have to report this every year to the public, exactly how well they're doing. It also restricts wolves north of I-40, Interstate 40, across north of the northern 2/3 of Arizona and New Mexico. Wolves may not cross it. We had a wolf a couple of years ago that went up and almost made it to Grand Canyon National Park, but it was picked up and brought back. Its GPS collar gave it away. It also allows increased management flexibility and take without a clear connection to actual recovery. You don't have to show that it's not going to impede recovery in order to have a lot more wolf removals. They can even remove them for eating too many elk, which is kind of, that's a poser to me. Make a whole, since, you know, what are they supposed to eat, salad? And it fails to recognize the survival of the US population as essential to recovery. There is a very small population. They are being reintroduced in Mexico, but so far the numbers down there are only about 30, and it's not growing real fast. So to say this is, the US population is not essential to recovery, it's the only population that's likely to do it. So next. This is potential wolf habitat in New Mexico and Arizona. There is not an equivalent map from the Fish and Wildlife Service showing any potential wolf habitat in Texas, and there is some. And some of it probably connects about as well as any to Mexico, but we'll get to that later. The dark green and blue are areas of potential wolf habitat that are pretty good habitat. The green is the best. The blue is sort of second best. And you can see that there is plenty of that habitat north of Interstate 40, because the orange line across there with the little shields on it, that's Interstate 40. You will note, if you know your geography pretty well, that the part in northwestern Arizona connects right on up to the Grand Canyon in Grand Canyon National Park. And the part up in the center, north central part of New Mexico connects up to the San Juan Mountains and other pretty darn good habitat and lots of things to eat up in Colorado. Now, this is important because the scientists have said that we need 3 subpopulations of wolves, not too closely connected, in order to make them evolve a little bit differently in each place, but in order to let a couple of wolves every so often make it between one and the other. So having some wolves up towards the Grand Canyon and into southern Utah, and having some in southern Colorado, northern New Mexico would be really useful in terms of promoting recovery. Next. This is a little poster I made for a demonstration in Albuquerque by the Fish and Wildlife Service a few years ago. A friend of mine wrote the ditty, the verse, and I put together the poster. There were only 7 genetic founders of the Mexican wolves, all of the wolves in the wild and in captivity. Only 7. And if you're into things like dog breeding and all, you know that inbreeding can be a real issue. The captive breeding facilities, and by the way, El Paso Zoo is one of them, so you know you have a real distinction here in El Paso. The captive breeding facilities have been very good at managing pairings, matchmaking. You know, they use computers and ship wolves around, and now they actually do artificial insemination. So they've managed to kind of do the best pairings they could, and they've retained a fair amount of the rather low genetic diversity that they started with. And in the captive breeding facilities, any decline in that has been fairly small. But in the wild population, that's not the case. Both the genetic diversity, the gene diversity, and the mean inbreeding have been dropping. The mean inbreeding has been going up and the gene diversity has been dropping. And this has been happening fairly consistently, and it is considerably lower, the gene diversity lower and the mean inbreeding higher than that of the captive population. Next. Since, this is my favorite slide in here, since 2014, they've used a technique called cross-fostering, and you've probably read about it. I don't know how anyone can escape if you read the paper or look on the internet. Cross-fostering newborn pups has replaced adult releases as a method of enhancing the genetics of the wild population. What they do is they take little bitty puppies who are only a few days old, and they're in the captive breeding facilities. They'll take a couple from a litter of a very, a genetically well endowed pair of wolves. They take them and very carefully transport them with, puppy sitters, and some pretty high-priced puppy sitters. I know one with a PhD, and they take them out to the recovery area, and they have identified a wild den where they've had some puppies and they would be compatible in age. They shouldn't be more than a few days different in age and size. And this is all done before their eyes open generally, and while they're really tiny, before they're weaned. And amazingly, and they take them and they mix them all up, which is what they're doing in this photograph, and letting them pee on each other, and wipe some feces from them on each other and make them all smell alike, and they put them in the den. And I'm told that mom probably really does recognize which ones are hers. But interestingly enough, moms take care of all of them. It's really amazing. I mean, they really do foster/adopt these little puppies. And they put them in this litter, and lo and behold, some of them survive and some don't, but that's true of wild-born puppies as well. And it has much potential, but it hasn't been tried for very long. They didn't get any out in 2015. They've had more each year after that. And this past year, 2020, they've put out 20 wolves into various dens in New Mexico and Arizona. Fingers crossed on that. They think that there's survival of several in one den in Arizona because they got some trail cam pics. But other than that, it's uncertain how many are surviving. So it's not the panacea necessarily. Next. Some folks complain that when you put out adult wolves, they don't do very well. Well, that's only partially true. When you take well-bonded pairs of wolves with pups that are a couple of months old, and you put them in the wild, they generally do fairly well. Those little pups seem to anchor them to the spot where you put them. They don't start wandering all over and running into town and things like this. And according to their own statistics that have been published in the service's own release and translocation plans for each year for the past several years, they've noted that about 66% of those pairs with pups, released with pups, are successful and go on to breed again in the wild. Cross-fostering, as of a week ago, I would have told you it was about 23% success rate in terms of known living cross-fostered pups from previous years. Unfortunately, one of those cross-fostered pups from last year turned up dead in August, and the monthly report came out, and now it's down to 20%. So, the track record is not great. However, wild-born wolf pups have you're lucky if they have a 50% survival rate, and often it's lower than that. So, both of these are good things to do, but they're not doing any initial releases. They have not for a number of years. The last initial release of a well-bonded pair with pups occurred actually in, I believe, 2006. So, it tells you something. Next. I wanted to watch that picture a little longer. This is the current legal news from starting with April 2018. In April 2018, Judge Jennifer Zips, a U.S. District Judge in Tucson, ruled as follows. She said, "This rule does not further conservation and recovery of the wolf based on the evidence she had." She remanded it. That means she sent back, here, do this over. She remanded it to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to write a new rule and make a deadline for that new rule or revised rule of May 2021. So we're getting close here to that. And then she did leave the 2015 rule in place in the meantime. She didn't make them stop using any particular part of it. Next. This is our digression, and this is where you got to put the thinking cap on and, you know, sort of sit there and puzzle over it. In 1982, there were amendments made to the ESA, I'm sorry, the Endangered Species Act. And they, at the time, the Congress provided for experimental populations, and we mentioned a little bit about that earlier. There were two kinds. One was non-essential, and the other, which has never actually been used, is essential, an essential population. If you're going to declare a population non-essential, you must, according to the wording of the Act, you must show that the loss of the entire population is not likely to appreciably reduce the likelihood of the survival of the species in the wild. If you wiped up the entire wild population, you could replace that and you would not have reduced the likelihood of the survival of the species in the wild. Well, in 1998, that was perfectly feasible. It was a non-essential population. You could call it that because there were 11 wolves out there. There were pushing 200, I believe, maybe in the 190s somewhere, in captivity. And if you had wiped out all 11, and actually 5 of them got killed, another one disappeared, a couple of them were recaptured, and they ended up having to replace mates for a couple of the males and put out some new wolves. So they were able to replace that, and it didn't make the survival of the species any less likely. But that is not the case with this population now. Next. The process of changing a rule, as I mentioned earlier, you know, writing one or changing one to do an environmental impact statement, you know, you gather data, you write up various plans and alternatives that the public looks at. And before they do that, they have what's called scoping, and they inquire of the public, scientists, livestock owners, conservationists, people from the SSP are perfectly willing, they're perfectly willing to have their comments as well. And the people who commented, and my husband and I did about 50 pages worth of comments, among others, and lots of organizations do those comments. These are some of the things that were identified as the most critical issues. One is the distinction between essentiality and non-essentiality. The non-essential designation is not appropriate, according to a number of the people doing scoping comments. There's a necessity of more than one US population. The scientists who were working on the recovery plan in 2017, after this rule was promulgated, said that they wanted or needed to have 750 wolves in 3 separate populations, loosely connected by dispersing wolves, and that none of those would be smaller than 200. Boundaries are basically a no-no. At least it's, you know, wolves can't read maps, and if they can find good habitat, for example, if they found a little good habitat in West Texas or, you know, somewhere down by Big Bend or something, there's really no logical reason not to let them go there. Genetics is a huge issue, and we've talked about that quite a bit. Take is an issue. I'm not going to belabor it, but if you take more wolves, you're going to have more trouble getting the population up and straightening out the genetics. And accountability for progress is a huge issue. So next. This is the sort of wild card in all of this. When they started doing this rule a few years ago, a big chunk of the border wall was things like vehicle barriers. And I have photos of those too. I took this picture a bit west of Santa Teresa, and I'm sure you all know where that is, from Highway 9. They were working on the wall. They were basically replacing vehicle barriers in most of this area. And when they do that, they make it almost impossible for animals, wolves, deer, javelina. You know, there's some great photographs of javelina along a wall over in Arizona from several years ago that are really kind of heartrending. And it would totally eliminate any possible natural genetic exchange between the Mexican population and the US populations. And yet they're counting on that population as part of what's going to let them recover the wolf. A single US population is not sufficient for recovery, period. It's no longer possible to rely on that. And I don't know how they expect the genetic interchange that they need to happen other than maybe conjugal visits. Next. There will be a draft I keep stumbling over environmental impact statement. For some reason, I get tongue twisted on that one. The draft EIS, or environmental impact statement, is not likely, we understand, to the best of the ability of people I know to parse this out, is not likely to happen before late fall. We won't see it, maybe not till early winter. And remember, this whole thing has to be finished by May of 2021, or they're going to have to go hat in hand to the judge for an extension. There will no doubt be public meetings. They almost have to do that, but they will undoubtedly be virtual. Normally they're in person, and for people like me, I do much better in an in-person meeting, and I'm sure some of you probably do too. There will likely be a 60-day comment period. Comments on all of these things are accepted both online. There's a website that you can, a government website where you can file your comments online, or you can send them via US mail or both. Finally, MexicanWolves.org, or Lobos of the Southwest, will be posting information on how you can support Mexican wolf recovery by way of your comments. And I'm sure that the zoo will do likewise, because they did, I believe, some solicitation of participation in the scoping process. So there is some hope, but a lot will depend upon partially how much pressure there is from the public to recover this animal, and then to some extent who the appointees are, and that are doing this, the people working in Fish and Wildlife Service, and who's running the show at the Department of the Interior. So that's not my department here, so I won't comment on my thoughts on that. Next. Photo credits. I put these in because sometimes people would like to crib one of these, and since this is going to be put up as a YouTube. The ones that had the wolves at the beginning and several of the ones in between, you can probably tell which are kind of amateurish. Those are my photos. Slides 3, 4, 6, 7, and 14 are Fish and Wildlife photos, and including the one of the cute cross-fostered puppies. Those are generally, you can use one of those, just credit Fish and Wildlife Service. Those were paid for by our money, so they are generally basically open access. And then slide 15 is from the California Wolf Center, the adult wolf and the little pups. I thought that one was too good to miss. And these are two members of the now defunct Bear Wallow pack. With the female on the left unfortunately died. The cause has not yet been revealed. It was a couple of years ago. Law enforcement keeps a lid on it for a while. And the one on the right is number 1338, and he is now the alpha male of a pack on the reservation, and they had puppies last year because there's at least one yearling running around with the pack. So I'm open to questions if there's any time left. I know I went too long, but this is a complicated and difficult subject for presenting on a video or on a Zoom meeting. And thank you to Sarah for changing the slides. It's I am just too ham-fisted to do that while talking at the same time, and so thank you.
Of course, I've been happy to help, Jean, and thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. As she said, we are open for questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing this so then we can kind of go into gallery view to see. And Jean, I'm going to go ahead and spotlight your camera. so that we can have you answer any questions for us. I did see in the chat that we did have a question. It was, I understand the wolf who came near Santa Teresa in 2017 returned to Mexico. Do you know how that wolf is doing now, or can you expand on that at all?
Stops. I can't get everything.
I can't. I don't have any information on that, actually, as to what became of that wolf when it went back. There have been about at least 3 in the last couple of years, and don't really know. Perhaps, I don't know if anyone else on this meeting has that information, but if you do, put it in the chat.
I do see another question. What are the most viable recovery zones for the 3 different populations?
I am not an expert on any of this stuff. I'm an advocate and basically a storyteller about experiences in the wild. So if you ever want to talk about, you know, what wolves we've seen and the soap operas of their packs, I'm your girl. But I would, according to the scientists who were originally the scientific panel of the 2017 recovery planning team, and then they were later sort of sent packing, and agency people did it from the 2 game and fish departments and Fish and Wildlife Service and a couple of folks from Mexico. It probably would be the Grand Canyon ecoregion, and the North Rim would be particularly good, I think. And then in New Mexico, it would be parts of northern New Mexico itself and the San Juan Mountains, that area. Now, Colorado, as most of you probably, again, one of those things that's hard to avoid hearing about, are having an initiative to do wolf releases in Colorado. And they have not specified what kind of wolves they're going to put there. And the other thing is, if you had open, if you didn't have the barrier, essentially, the imaginary fence at I-40, wolves could go up and exchange, because there's pretty good habitat that you could connect to through northern New Mexico and get up to southern Colorado. And if that occurred, there would probably be some mixing, but some of the geneticists have said we really pretty much could use a little. And they don't necessarily think it would lead to genetic swamping. I am not a geneticist, and we may have articles on that. You may see stuff on MexicanWolves.org occasionally from some of the folks who are. So keep your ears open and your eyes peeled, and maybe we'll get some info that will be helpful. Next.
Good, awesome.
Next question.
So this is actually something that I wanted to ask, because you mentioned that you are more of that storyteller. So we have a question: any memorable experiences encountering Mexican wolves?
How long do you have?
I'm sure you have lots of stories.
I'm going to be as brief as I can here. A couple of years ago in 2017, in June, we were camped up on Escudilla Mountain, which, if some of you are fans of Alto Leopold, you'll recognize that name from the San County Almanac. And we were camped on an area that's kind of a big open valley called Terry Flat. And it has Paddy Creek runs through the flat. And we were camped over at the edge of the woods, looking down into this valley and up the valley. And we could see a good kilometer away, or maybe more. And we were eating our breakfast, literally drinking our breakfast coffee, and some wolves sort of started slowly coming down into the valley. And they did this until there were a total of 5 of them there. And they kind of did a few little feints at a bunch of elk that were grazing, but then they kind of, the elk were unimpressed, apparently. And then the wolves went and lay down in the grass in the middle of the valley, where it was very moist, and took a nap. And they took a nap for, according to my field notebook, about an hour. It was a good 60 minutes that they were snoozing there. And then all of a sudden, we happened to look up on the grassy slope on the west side of the valley, and there was a mama and elk and a young calf. This is June. They're not very big. They drop them, you know, around what, May? I don't know, somewhere around in there. And so they were just grazing up there. And then all of a sudden, for some unknown and crazy reason, just I guess because he was a twerp, a kid, the baby went running down toward the valley and right straight at the wolf pack, who were all still napping. And the wolves started getting up. And Mom bolted after Junior, and then she was leading him into the woods on the other side of the valley while the wolves gave chase. And eventually they disappeared into the woods. About 6 or 7 minutes later, you know, we had a sort of half expected to hear some horrible mayhem going on, but it was pretty far. It was about, my photos are on MexicanWolves.org, and you can see the photo of this chase on one of the 2 pup dates. Talks about pups go hunting. Anyway, the mama and baby disappeared somewhere up in the woods, and the wolves, instead of, you know, coming back with mouthfuls of a deer, or, you know, or an elk leg rather, to take back to their the den where the year's puppies were. One by one, these wolves came back 6 or 7 minutes after they chased them up there. And a couple of them lay down and, you know, were just looking very tired. And one of them came down our way, and actually there was standing water in various places in Paddy Creek. And this guy, or gal, and it had a collar, so I'm thinking it may have actually been a former cross-fostered pup, that at least I'm hoping it was. He's still living, so it could have been. Anyway, he took a dip in the water, and then, you know, shook himself and then took off and went on up the ridge on the other side of the valley. So we were just, it's the only time we've ever seen part of a chase. And all the 57 wolves I've seen, and Peter's seen just a couple fewer, because I've gone out sometimes with just a small group of women, or occasionally alone. We've never ever seen that before, and it was really cool to watch, and we just couldn't stop talking about it for a long time, and still can't. So that's my story for the day. That's probably the best one ever. Although I got a really close look at a wolf who wandered down the road and did not, you know, he waited and all of a sudden saw me and took off. That happened last year in June. June's a good time to go out, apparently.
Wow. That is so cool. It sounds like you just have so many amazing experiences seeing wolves and being able to see part of a chase, a hunt. Like, how cool is that? Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. So do we have any other questions from any of our viewers right now? We probably have time for maybe one more question. So if anybody does have a question, you're welcome again to put it into the chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and you can ask your question. Everybody about a minute. Any others?
I was just looking at the chat to see if there was anything there in it.
Yeah. I think we've gotten the ones in the chat. Well, I guess I have one last question then, kind of a good way to end it here. If we wanted to go out and maybe try to spot a wolf in the wild, what would you suggest we do? Like, where's the best time to go? Where's the best place to go for us?
I really can't tell you the best time to go, because we've seen them in the winter, we've seen them in the summer. I would say we've seen more not in the coldest winter weather, although it's a great time to look for tracks, because, you know, if you've got some snow, you will see more tracks than you would probably otherwise. In terms of best places to go, do not go to established campgrounds in the forest. This is one where you're going to have to rough it a little and disperse camp. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. It's not really a secret, but for the moment at least, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they have been doing this and Arizona Game and Fish and New Mexico Game and Fish, the interagency field team have been posting flight locations. They used to be all flight locations, but now a lot of them are GPS locations of wolves. Now, these are not current, and they should not be, because we don't want to paint a target all over these guys. But if you, about somewhere between every 2 weeks and every month. It's been only monthly the last couple of months. They put these up, and it's a fairly rough idea. It's a polygon that's probably a couple of miles across or thereabouts. And they post them with the numbers, the stud book numbers of the wolves and the name of the pack if there is one, if they're part of a pack. If not, they just put the stud book number of the wolf. And you can look at those, and if you, what we do, I tend to print a few of them off when I'm particularly interested in a specific pack, and then compare it from time to time, and you can get an idea of the general range where these guys hang out. And then you go and you camp somewhere around there and you keep your fingers crossed. And the problem with this is that those 57 wolves, like 11 of those were on one trip.
Oh, wow.
2 packs, and that was very early on, and long story behind that one. But most of the rest of them, there are at least 2 or 3 at a time that you're seeing, with the elk horns, with the elk puppy, elk calf that the pups, the yearling pups and adults were chasing. There were 5 wolves, so that's another 5. So you can see that you can go out and I've been out over 530 nights, so you can see that if you take a good look at that, you're not seeing them very often. Yeah. You have to like to look at other things. You'll often see elk, you'll often see other critters, deer, and all kinds of birds if you're into birding. But and we like all of that stuff. So it's not a lost trip if you didn't see wolves. We don't go out and say, this is going to be a bummer if we don't see them. That happens more than it doesn't. So yeah, patience and going out a lot. And right now that can be kind of difficult. Okay. On the other hand, one of the safest activities you could pursue probably in a time of COVID is to go dispersed camp somewhere where you're not close to anybody else. And if you base it on wolf locations rather than some other things, you're probably not likely to have a lot of neighbors. The last time we were out, which was in June, I believe, we saw one other guy who was camped clear across that valley. It was the same valley where the elk horns were. And he was clear across the valley, and you could barely see him without binoculars, his camper. So, but hunting season is a little dicier because there are more people out there.
For sure. Awesome.
Oh, yeah. If you take a dog with you, keep him on a lead. Absolutely do not let him run around, or her. And we use the kind of orange tape they put on construction sites, you know, to mark dangerous stuff. We put that on the dog's collar and have streamers of that on the collar. And I learned that from a woman who has done a lot of outfitting in Yellowstone, in the Yellowstone area. And if you don't want your dog, particularly if you have like a German Shepherd like we have, or you've got some kind of husky or any big dog that could possibly remotely resemble a wolf or a coyote, protect it.
Of course. Well, that is some great advice. It sounds like, yeah, go out, spend a lot of time outdoors, and keep those fingers crossed to maybe spot one if anybody does have that on their bucket list, like what me and my husband do. Maybe eventually we'll have a lucky trip.
Well, seriously, if you want to do that, let us know ahead of time, because we may be able to give you some tips. You just can't do it very far ahead because these things move around. Packs come and go. Some of them fizzle out after a while, and others get big and they, you know, have offspring that are. It's just hard to predict.
Constantly changing. Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much, Jean, for the wonderful presentation. I know I learned from your presentation, learning about a lot of the legal aspects of it, and also hearing your stories. It was really great learning from you of your experiences with Mexican wolves. That wraps up our first live presentation for our virtual Fiesta this year. So I hope everybody enjoyed that, and you'll join us on our next one at 11 o'clock. And again, one last thank you. Thank you so much, Jean.
Thank you, as I say, for being the tech person for me. And also, I want to give a little credit to my husband, Peter, who is the responsible for those legal slides. We used some of those in a joint presentation where I talked about camping with the wolves and he talked about the legal aspects that we gave up at West Yellowstone, Montana a couple of years ago. And that was really fun. It's fun to do a joint one like that because then you can mix it up a little and they have two different people, personalities, and we'll do something like that sometime.
That sounds great. Awesome. Well, again, thank you. And I guess we will see everybody hopefully at our next presentation. I'm going to go ahead and end this one. If you're interested in our next one, go ahead and jump on our Facebook or our website to see when the next presentation. You can join us on Zoom again. Thanks, everybody. Bye.